Would you agree with me that there's a lot of fear in our country right now? Between terrorist attacks and economic worries, we have become America the anxious. But according to one U.S. president, who was no stranger to financial struggles or war, we have nothing to fear but fear itself. Really? I can think of all kinds of things to fear besides fear itself. How about you? What do you fear? If you consider all of the phobias that exist, there's definitely no shortage of things to fear. Take, for example, allium phobia. Any of you suffer from allium phobia? Okay, that's a fear of garlic. Okay, I know my wife does not suffer from that. Allium phobia? No? Okay. How about penthrophobia? Anyone? Penthrophobia? That's a fear of your mother-in-law. Oh, I see some hands go up now. We'll keep that on the down low. That's one of those you kind of keep quiet if you suffer from that phobia. Chromatophobia? Anyone? That's a fear of money. Yes? No? Okay. All right, one last fear. How about homilophobia? Any of you suffer from homilophobia? That's a fear of sermons. It's true. Okay, I see that hand. Okay, that's actually kind of a good one to know. Because, like, if you fall asleep during the sermon and someone just jabs you in the ribs, you say, oh, I'm sorry, but my homilophobia just kicked in and I think I fainted. You know, that might get you out of a sermon or two. There is plenty to fear, which is why Easter is such good news. For Easter is about hope, a hope that frees our hearts from fear, a hope that changes everything, a hope that is rooted in the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Now, 1 Corinthians 15, which we just heard from, is a fascinating chapter written by a man named Paul that discusses and explains the meaning of Jesus' resurrection. And the first thing we see in this chapter is that Easter is about something that happened, something that God has done for us. There was a man named Jesus Christ who died for our sins. This happened. He was buried. This happened. He was raised on the third day. This happened. Christ was dead for 3 days, and then he was resurrected. Not resuscitated. He did not come back to life from death. He was resurrected. He went through death and out into life on the other side. No one else in human history has done this, but with Jesus, it happened. He then appeared to a man named Cephas, which is Peter. Then he appeared to 12 of his closest followers. Then he appeared to more than 500 of his followers. This happened. Now, I know that some, if not many of us, hear this and say, really? That sounds good, but that didn't really happen. That would be impossible. Dead people stay dead. This is a symbolic story. Jesus appeared to people in a figurative sense of the word, not in a physical sense. I know that some, if not many of us, may think that. I want to just address that for a brief moment. You know, 2,000 years ago, the Jewish people living in Israel were waiting for a Messiah, a leader, a liberator who would set them free from Roman rule. According to Harvard professor Harvey Cox, there were at least 6 such folks claiming to be the Messiah within a century of Jesus' time. 6 Messiah candidates. What happened to them? All of them were killed, and all of their movements died. No one follows a dead Messiah. But then there's Jesus. As Paul tells us, according to his followers, he was killed, he was buried, and then he was raised from the dead. His followers spent the rest of their lives making this claim. Did they get any money for doing this? Any book deals? Any reality TV shows? No. They got persecuted and killed, but they still made this claim. Now, before Easter, Jesus' disciples were completely dejected because their leader had just been executed. After the crucifixion, they were hiding out in rooms in fear that they too would be killed. Yet after Easter, they were boldly proclaiming that Jesus was alive. How do you explain that kind of transformation? They weren't just willing to die for what they believed in. They were willing to die for what they had seen. And what happened to Jesus' movement after his death? Rather than dying out, it changed the world. It outlasted the Roman Empire. How do you explain the rise of Jesus' movement after his death? One explanation that makes sense is that Jesus Christ was in fact raised from the dead. Sir Lionel Luckhoo holds the Guinness Book of World Records as the most successful trial attorney in the world. He garnished his title when he succeeded in getting his 245th consecutive murder acquittal in 1985. That's pretty amazing. 245 consecutive murder trials, either one before the jury or one on appeal. Now, it's fair to say that he qualifies as a world-class expert on what constitutes reliable, admissible, and persuasive evidence. Now, during a period of spiritual seeking in his life, Sir Lionel Luckhoo decided to investigate the question of Jesus' resurrection. What evidence is there, and how well does it hold up? Here's what he concluded after doing his own research and study. I say unequivocally that the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus Christ is so overwhelming that it compels acceptance. That's the conclusion of the most successful attorney on the planet when he looked at the historical evidence surrounding Jesus' resurrection. I would encourage you to look at the evidence for yourself. Now, as I see it, there's good reason, not absolute proof, but good, sound, historically based reason for believing that Jesus Christ was in fact raised from the dead. Easter is about something that happened, something that God has done for us. But that's not all. Easter is also about something that will happen, something that God will do for us. See, according to Paul in 1 Corinthians 15, history as we know it will one day reach its final chapter. We don't know when, but one day God's kingdom will come on earth as it is in heaven. That will happen when Jesus Christ appears. And just as he has experienced resurrection life, when he appears, those who belong to him will also experience resurrection life. Paul writes, all will be made alive in Christ, but each in his own order. Christ the first fruits, that's already happened. Then at his coming, those who belong to Christ. The first fruits, this imagery from agriculture, the first fruits are a sign that the harvest has begun and a promise that there is more fruit to follow. Christ is the first fruits. Those who belong to him are the fruits to come. For Christ, the resurrection of the dead is a present reality. It happened. For those who belong to Christ, the resurrection of the dead is a future reality. It will happen. Why do we believe in this future? Because of what Jesus has done in the past. How do you know this isn't just an empty promise? We point to Jesus. What's the basis of your belief that you're going to be raised from the dead? We point to Jesus. Jesus has gone before us into resurrection life so that we can follow him. He's gone ahead of us so that one day we can be where he now is. Easter is about what God has done for us. And Easter is about what God will do for us. And because that's true, Easter is ultimately about hope. Knowing what God has done for us in the past and knowing what God will do for us in the future gives us hope in the present. Not hope based on who we are, but hope based on who God is. Not hope based on what we can do, but hope based on what God is doing and will do. The good news of Easter inspires us to live with hope today. Today we celebrate, we laugh, we dance because we've heard the good news of God's victory over death. A Harvard Medical School professor named Jerome Groopman wrote a book called The Anatomy of Hope. In his work as a doctor, he discovered that patients are looking for a genuine sense of hope, and that hope is as important to them as anything he could prescribe as a physician. He defines hope as the ability to see a path to the future. See, that's what Jesus gives us on Easter morning. He gives us a path to the future, a future full of new potential and possibility. When Jesus sprang from the grave, hope sprang with him. Dr. Groopman goes on to say, I think hope has been, is, and always will be the heart of medicine and healing. We could not live without hope. Even with all the medical technology available to us today, we still come back to this profound human need to believe that there is a possibility to reach a future that is better than the one in the present. Don't you want to believe that you can reach a future that is better than the present? Easter tells us that there is a future that is better than the present, and that Jesus has already stepped into it. And he has done so that you and I can step into it as well. Jesus' resurrection doesn't mean that something happened to Jesus, but everything else stayed the same. No, Jesus' resurrection means that God's future has arrived in the present. Easter morning is the first day of God's new week. It's a sign of the new life that God is bringing and will bring into our world. We know that there is a world of new potential and possibility because we got a glimpse of it on Easter morning. And this glimpse gives us a hope to work for it in our world today. As I mentioned earlier, 1 Corinthians 15, and I encourage you to read this chapter if you never have. 1 Corinthians 15, the whole chapter deals with resurrection. But listen again to how Paul ends this chapter, the very last verse. Verse 58 says this, therefore stand firm. Let nothing move you. Always give yourselves fully to the work of the Lord, because you know that your labor in the Lord is not in vain. Hope enables us to stand firm in the face of fear. Hope saves us from giving up. Hope keeps us from throwing in the towel. Hope whispers into our ears, your labor is not in vain. Nothing you do for Jesus is a waste of time or effort. By introducing a world full of new potential and possibility, Easter gives us meaningful work to accomplish. And most importantly, Easter gives us the hope to do it. Martin Luther once wrote, everything that is done in the world is done by hope. Everything that is done in the world is done by hope. Our country desperately needs hope right now. We find ourselves in circumstances that we never would have predicted. Some of us are trapped in financial situations where it's hard to see much hope. And some of us are dealing with addictions and caught in cycles that drain us of hope. Some of us are dealing with the chronic aches and pains that come with aging and can sap us of hope. Some of us feel stuck in marriages where we don't see much hope for change. Some of us feel discouraged about our work situation. Some of us feel discouraged about our political environment. Some of us feel discouraged about the challenges that confront our island. Some of us are in the midst of relational hurt and tension that feel hopeless. Some of us have had our dreams dashed and are afraid to hope again. See, real life, everyday life has a way of eating away at our hope. Paul says to you and to me, stand firm. Don't give up. There is a hope that can sustain you in anything and everything, including death. And that is the resurrection hope that is yours in Jesus Christ. Hope not based on who we are, but hope based on who God is. Hope not based on what we can do, but hope based on what God is doing and can do and will do. John Ortberg writes, people have not gathered for the past 2,000 years to say, the stock market is risen, it is risen indeed. They have not gathered to say national security is risen, it is risen indeed. Here's the one hope that has held up human beings across every continent and culture for 2,000 years in the face of poverty, pain, hardship, and death itself. Christ is risen. He is risen indeed.